Welcome to the Speak Pact podcast, where high-performing speakers and the producers who hire them merge to give you the insider secrets to the lucrative speaking industry. Antoniette Rose, your podcast host and celebrated speaker agent, unveils insider success strategies. Discover a nexus of thought leaders and bookers, maximizing your potential in each and every episode. Your ticket to ultimate speaking success begins right here. Catch the transformative insights waiting for you on the Speak Pact podcast, hosted by the industry powerhouse herself, Antoniette Rose.
Welcome back to Speak Pact. We are going to dive in today with a fellow speaker agent, and we're really going to dive into the world of marginalized speakers and why it is an important thing to talk about. So I have a veteran agent with me here, Sean Lawton, who is founder of Collective Speakers. And this is really an area that he has focused on with his partner and made some real strides in. So welcome to the stage, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And what I'd like to just dive into, number one, is your journey. I know that you worked with Kepler. You've worked with some big agencies and bureaus. Sometimes they're synonymous. Sometimes they're very, very different. So what got you into the world of speaking and focusing your profession in this area? And then finally creating your own company. Just kind of take us on that journey.
Yeah, I think my journey starts where a lot of people in the speaking industry started, which was dumb luck or accident. I don't know that too many people go to college with the aspiration of I want to be a lecture agent. I was a communications major and I loved public relations. I was living in the DC area and I was about 2 years out of college and was sort of bouncing around a bit aimlessly as we did in the 90s. In your mid-20s. You just moved from place to place until you found something that stuck. And I was struggling. And I do remember this was a time when you would pull out the want ads. And I remember going to the classified section of the Washington Post and the ad said,
you went under 30, it's going to be like, want ads? What the heck?
You're going to have a whole transcription of like defining all the terms I'm using here. But it simply said, Celebrity Speakers Bureau seeks administrative assistant. And I was at a point in my career where I hadn't gotten very far. So taking a step back to administrative assistant was not seen as demoralizing. It was just I needed to find something that excited me. And I wound up at Kepler Speakers as an assistant there and really got a crash course in what the speaking industry was and what it wasn't. At the time I started there was shortly after the release of Apollo 13, the blockbuster Tom Hanks movie, and they represented all of the astronauts from the film, the real live astronauts. And so that was an exciting time because they were, they weren't necessarily household names, but they had these really compelling stories. And I could see the way that, the spoken word format and the way that a keynote could really transfix an audience and could entertain and engage. And it wasn't something that I really knew a lot about. I'd been to one event when I was in college. I went to a debate between Ice-T and G. Gordon Liddy, which we could do
had to be fun.
We could do a whole other hour on what that was like. But I remember even that kind of sticking with me as like, that's a really interesting way to receive information rather than just going to a class and listening to a professor, listening to somebody who's had the lived experience. And so that was sort of my entry point in getting interested in the business. And then not quite a year into my tenure there, an opening came in our college division. And so I moved in 98 as one of the college agents at Kepler. And we were at the time one of the top college agencies for speakers, and just kind of got thrown into the deep end of the pool, and it was a lot of fun. But what was curious for me was, it was at a time when the agency and I think the industry was changing in that, academics had sort of dominated the college circuit and pop culture was starting to seep into it a little bit more. It was no longer just the president of the ACLU. They were looking at somebody from the real world or something that might not necessarily be perceived as academic or notable, but it's what the college audiences wanted. And so I was constantly in conflict between, what the administrations were saying they wanted and then what the audiences at college campuses were actually showing up for. And we were a bureau that was sort of in transition at the time. We had a few things that were clicking, but I was really hoping to find more things that could be a little bit of both, sort of that infotainment of something that would bring out 1,000 people on a rainy Tuesday night, but give them something more than just, laughter, but something that would have some substance. And about 2 years after that, I started a relationship with Chuck D, who was the founder and frontman for Public Enemy, who I was a huge fan of in college. And I got to know him and his manager pretty well. And I went to the president of Kepler at the time, and I said, I'd like to bring this person on as a speaker for us. And, we were, a fairly distinguished bureau, and there was a little bit of side eye about, we're bringing on a rapper? That seems strange. Are you sure this is going to work? And I said, just give me a chance. And it wound up being, a watershed moment in my career, and really, sort of a turning point for the agency, in that we were able to move into these places where, when you book something, that's a little too heady, maybe there's some great takeaways, but if there's 20 people in the audience, sometimes you wonder, did we really have an impact? I didn't want to have a half empty lecture hall. I wanted to pack the rafters. And so I wanted to find a way to bring excitement and also bring substance. So that sort of led me to become sort of a talent scout, if you will, in that I was always looking for, okay, who's the next speaker that we should be looking at? Or what's the next trending topic that's going to be relevant to college audiences? And sort of developed a lane there in trying to find speakers before they were big names. And that was a lot of fun. And I think I got more enjoyment out of that part of it than the actual sales part of the job. But it was always fun to develop somebody who had an interesting story, who didn't know anything about the speaking world, and kind of taking them on that journey. So I did that for 20 years, was a vice president, and, developed a strong roster. But towards the end of my tenure there, I started to see the landscape was changing, and it really didn't have anything to do with Kepler. It was just the people who, were the gatekeepers, the people who ran the speakers bureaus, everything started to kind of look and sound the same. We wanted astronauts and mountain climbers and inspirational stories. And it all started to blend together after a while. And meanwhile, I could kind of see, when I would go out to events, audiences, especially younger audiences, were less and less engaged with these stories, who were going to give you their 7 keys to success with their PowerPoint. And it seemed like they were looking for something a little bit different. And a lot of that had to do with diversity. The people who were getting the main stage slots at a lot of conferences and at a lot of universities tended to be cisgender straight white men. And that isn't what the audience was looking like anymore. And I started to see a lane. I assumed at some point somebody else was going to see that lane and start a bureau that would reflect that. And when it didn't happen, some of my speakers said, it needs to be you, because you understand that, learning is constant. When we're presented with new information at any point in life, sometimes we have to go back and revisit, our beliefs. And that's really what I think a great speaker can do, is have you challenge what you already believe and revisit what's gone before. And now you can reimagine what might be possible. And so much of that centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it felt like there was enough substance there, and there was a lack of support for these kinds of speakers, that we could build an entire agency just around that. So when we started in the fall of 2018, we really had 4 tentpoles. It was going to be social justice, which would be diversity, equity, inclusion, LGBTQIA, disability, and mental health. It felt like those were 4 areas that were being underserved by most speakers bureaus. And I felt like if I just focused on that, and I didn't try to be everything to everyone, I wasn't going out and chasing all of the the former Department of Transportation secretary, or the hot new astronaut of the moment, or the most recent mountain climber, or even trending authors. The Tuesday Agency, they are doing great with authors. I wanted to find something that was very specific and unique to what I really felt was important and underserved. And so out of a little bit of whimsy and I would say a little bit of ignorance, Collective Speakers was born, and it's been a very fun journey, and we're coming up on 6 years.
What a cool backdrop to Collective Speakers. First of all, 20 years with Kepler. Like that's significant. It wasn't like you were there with 2 years, 3 years, kind of gleaned some of their ideas and then left. You devoted a significant portion of your career and your life to that one agency. When you built Collective Speakers, over and above really wanting to focus on these kind of lesser heard voices, and I even see it just with just white women, right, versus men. There's still that happening. I think we're getting better, hopefully, in the industry. And I think there's a lot more desire for relatable voices, right? And those are not going to be the polished, perfect white men in suits, right?
Yeah.
I love white men in suits. I love all different color, all the things, but typically that's been your speaker on stages. And I think there is that hunger for relatable voices, and that's going to come from those who haven't had a typical journey. Maybe we have disability, mental well-being, we're a minority, whatever it might be. So I love that you decided that that's your lane. We know that there are certain bureaus and agencies that have their focus. What did you glean from Kepler that you preserved in your own style, right, of being an agency owner versus what you knew you weren't going to do? And I think specifically when it comes to applications, because I'm sure you get applications all the time, right? And you've got to field those because not everybody's going to be somebody that you can proudly recommend. So just tell me a little bit about that. What did that 20 years at Kepler give you that you took with you? And what did they give you where you like, that's something I'm not going to bring into my own agency?
Well, I thought, just because I was going into places that we were going to be championing, marginalized voices, it doesn't mean that we're a nonprofit. It doesn't mean that the end goals of these events changes. For me, the secret sauce was always, how do we dollarize diversity? Because I always believed that the reason why diversity was important is because that's how you're going to survive. The brands and the organizations that have not adapted to the changing demographics are struggling. And I could see that was a dam that was about to break. So, but I knew that, if I went in and yes, I have a lot of activists and I have a lot of people that if you go in their social media, they are hard charging about some challenging topics. But I didn't want to ever make it feel like we're doing this just for virtual signaling or, to get a cookie or to check a box. I wanted it to be so that organizations understood that investing in DEI is actually good for business and it's going to be good for the bottom line. And I know that inevitably every speaker always had two objectives that they wanted to take to an audience. How do you make more money and how do you save time? Those were always the two time-tested things that no matter who you were as a speaker, if the audience could leave with those kinds of inspirations, more money and more time, two things that are always in short supply, then that was a successful speaker. But too many times, BIPOC speakers were left out of the conversation. Disabled speakers were only kept in the inspiration porn bucket, where, let's applaud for the person who overcame adversity, rather than acknowledging systemic ableism that needs to be challenged within organizations, within brands, within manufacturing, in order to move into the next part of what the world is going to look like. And of course, 2020 was that flashpoint. But before that, in terms of what I didn't want to redo is, what I find with most speakers bureaus, and I would say if you do a Google search today and look at any bureau out there, they all kind of look the same. A lot of them list the same speakers. You'll see Damon John and Magic Johnson and Anderson Cooper and a lot of the same names and a lot of
William Shatner.
the professional speakers who are out there, who are non-exclusive, so they're listed by every agency. And what I really kind of found strange, that unlike any other industry, most bureaus did not have a brand. What differentiates agency A from agency B? They list the same products, they operate the same way, they send kind of the same contracts, they all offer the same kind of service. And we do some of that too, but I was not afraid of, letting some of my progressive values shine through. There are certain speakers that aren't going to be a match for us for that reason. And so I'm not, I'm not for everybody. I'm not afraid to walk away from a client that I just don't have anything that's going to serve what they're looking for. I never felt the need to try to have 700 speakers listed. And oh my gosh, if you don't see something you like, don't worry, we'll find it for you. And if they're not listed here, we'll go get them for you. That's what most agencies do. They're all just chasing the tennis ball. What I wanted to do is I wanted to really invest on the talent side, find out what are the things that I need to know. A common example of that right now is a lot of people will come to me and say, why do you have your pronouns why is it on the screen right now? Why do you have your pronouns in your signature? Are you trans? Why is this important? Why am I seeing everybody talking about pronouns? Why does it matter? Well, it does matter. And, I didn't know anything about the community until probably around 2012 or 2013, when Janet Mock, Laverne Cox, and some other speakers really started to make some headway in the mainstream. And I was able to learn. And my feeling is, if I could learn at middle age, so can you. And I think what's lacking is curiosity. And I wanted to build a bureau and a brand that invited curiosity, that, okay, maybe you don't understand what transgender is, what it means, how to use the words correctly. But if you want to learn, here are some thought leaders who can help you there. So it is really incumbent that we find event planners that have that curiosity and are not going to be offended if some of their values and some of their existing thinking gets challenged. And what I'm finding, and where some of the early conflict was, audiences are ready for this. Audiences are ready for hard conversations. They don't want to be told everything's going to be fine, especially if you talk to a millennial or a Gen Z. They don't want to hear all about the American dream, because their version of the American dream has kind of sucked. So they want people who are going to talk to them in reality. And what I'm finding is a lot of event planners still have some fear based around that, because it's their job. If I put somebody on the stage and they burn the place down with their words, I'm going to lose my job. I can't put somebody too challenging on these stages. And what I kept hearing from the audience is, please stop giving us milquetoast speakers who say the same thing every year. Give us something to challenge us.
Well, that's something I really want to dive into, because I am finding there's a couple of things that you said I want to touch on, but one of the things is pretty much every corporation is kind of mandated to tick the box where it comes to their so many DEI, events per quarter, whatever it might be. And it's an important topic. At the same time, how many meetings can you go to?
Yeah.
Right. Telling us, yes, I love everybody. Like, good. Yeah. That whole thing. And so I really have seen, and I want to know if you've seen this as well. I've seen corporations, especially in their total rewards programs and their L&D programs, where they are looking for voices who can speak on how do we include somebody with a disability, how do we make everybody feel welcome, and open communication within our teams, all of those things, without saying DEI. Right? Can we talk about the problems and the solutions versus this title that it's not that we're no longer excited about it. It's just been, too many carrots can be too many carrots, right? Too much of anything can wind up being, oh my gosh, I got to go to another one of those meetings. So tell me a little bit about just keeping the topic fresh and relative in a way where people aren't feeling like this is being shoved on you, like it's some political agenda. It's more than that, right? It's you and me being able to communicate, whether we have um, likenesses or we have differences, right? You're male, I'm female. I might have a disability, whatever it is, that we can still really accept and communicate with one another if we're working together within a team, where I can be a little bit more empathetic about some of the challenges you have versus some of the things that I deal with. So in my world and in our agency, we're really looking at it more from communication, resiliency, and retention. We're approaching it from those angles. I'd like to hear how you and your agency is maybe keeping the topic fresh, a very important topic, right? Fresh, feeling like something that people want to participate in versus are kind of being forced on them in a corporate setting anyway.
Well, those people who have that feeling of, oh, you're shoving your agenda down my throat, those are the people who feel most threatened by the changing demographics of the world. They view power and influence as pie. And if another organization or another group gains some influence or power, it means there's less for them. And that's just an antiquated view that needs to go away.
Well, one thing I just as a little bit of a devil's advocate,
Mhm.
I'm hearing it from all people. I actually represent several disabled speakers and then speakers of every color, and it's just one more meeting that they have to go to talk about something they've already bought into, like they already believe in it. So I think there's more of that than somebody sitting there, oh, I don't want to go to another DEI meeting. I think the attitude isn't that. It's just like, we've covered this road. I've got it. I feel like I've got all the skills that I need. Why am I mandated to go to another meeting
Well,
about this? So I think it's more about how can we make it relevant to them versus it feeling like a forced meeting, like something I want to go to
mhm.
versus something that is just a check mark of a corporation having to get in for, one of these meetings a quarter. I think that's what I'm seeing from the canvas of the speakers world. I don't know if you're at the recent National Speakers Association, but I'm seeing that we want to keep this topic and this subject desirable and not feel forced, but feel more collaborative. So I'm not, maybe you are, because this is your focus. I'm not seeing a lot of resistance to the topic. I'm seeing a resistance to, it could be, yet one more time management meeting,
Mhm.
right? It like too many it feels more like a checked off box than um, something that is relevant that will help move the needle forward for everybody involved.
Yeah, I would push back on almost all of that. For one
Okay.
thing, what we saw was in the summer of 2020, we had our 432nd racial reckoning in this country, and it was prompted by the George Floyd video, and we all were horrified by watching the murder of an innocent black man, and it seeming like how could this possibly happen here? And what we saw then was a lot of DEI initiatives were born out of that as a reaction to that moment, as a reaction to that video, as a reaction to that horror, rather than realizing that that was not the first black man killed by police that year, that month, that day. We could go back to Ferguson just a few years earlier. We could go back to, my college years and watching the Rodney King video. So people could say, oh, we've already had this conversation. Sure, but nothing's changed. So for people who are like, oh, why do we have to do another diversity meeting? Because we need you to change. If you're going to tell me that there's too much diversity, then I don't know if you're paying attention, because right now, the numbers aren't changing. And you could take it, to the gender conversation. We still have the pay gap between men and women in the workplace. That we know about it. We see the reports every year. It hasn't changed much, despite the fact that we talk about it a lot. And I think one of the
Even on stages, there is still, I can get male speaker booked, generally a white male speaker booked and I have to negotiate
Mhm.
harder for women, or someone with a disability. And another aspect of disability is sometimes we need the travel budget to be doubled. I've got one
Mhm.
in particular, a police officer who was paralyzed in the line of duty, who, if he travels to a speaking engagement, he absolutely needs to have somebody with him, which is a whole nother set of expenses, right? So where's the space for that if you're going to bring in
Well, I mean, the same thing
um,
would be true if you brought in an A-list actress. She's going to have an assistant, a stylist, yeah.
entourage? Yeah.
So, that would be a disability tax. The fact that it is more expensive, and that is something that definitely has to be addressed, but that doesn't diminish the importance of that, because I think, disability is one area in particular where we have had a lot of success because too many speakers were coached into how to be inspirational speakers. And that's not what disability is. Disability is not about, I need to be fixed. I need to be cured. I need to raise money for this foundation so that someday I can walk again. If you talk to most disabled speakers, they don't want to be fixed. They want you to fix the world and make it accessible for them. I mean, if you think back to the summer of 2020 when we were all learning how to do our industry on Zoom, you couldn't even do captions without an upgrade or without an add-on or an extension. We had captionless meetings in the early days. That's now fairly standard. But one of the things that I try to advocate for, which again goes back to, I'm trying to dollarize these conversations. This isn't about, I expect you to be a good person and care about disabled people out of the goodness of your heart. I'm trying to explain to you that if you aren't having these conversations, 25% of your potential customer base is off limits to you. And the reason why
Mm.
I advocate so strongly for speakers who have disabilities who specifically speak to their identity and to what they need and to what they want, rather than cures and band-aids for those things, is because we all benefit. It's just like when I talk about, the gender pay gap or white supremacy or any of these things that some people, think I'm a bit of a raving lunatic. It's we all are harmed by these systems, even me. And when you flip that and you look at how do we improve the world in terms of accessibility, we all benefit. And there are so many examples of that. The curb cut effect is the most legendary. You know, I have a daughter who's 9 years old and she loves to ride her scooter. And once upon a time, she wouldn't have been able to have just gone up the curb and continued on her path. She would have had to stop and lift it up and go over. But in order to make an accessible world, there's now the curb cut. If you look at some of the things that we use every day, audiobooks, texting, podcasts, a lot of those were originally born out of accommodations for disabled communities. So, when I say, you need to care about this, it's because you need to figure out, first of all, why you're doing it. A lot of the DEI work that we saw in 2020 and 2021 was very performative. It was, oh my gosh, there's races in America. We didn't know. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We need to react to it. And so they put out a lot of very performative actions and programs that they weren't really invested in because they didn't really know why they were doing. They were reacting to a very turbulent summer and a very turbulent time. They didn't ask themselves what the point was. They didn't really have an end game. They didn't really know what they were doing. So, of course, they wound up doing a lot of the same things over and over again. It got boring. It got redundant. And eventually, when budgets got tight, that was the first thing they cut. And what we've seen is DEI budgets have been slashed. We see that DEI has been made a political hot potato, and that, certain political figures have used that to their advantage, to the point that, depending on who I'm talking to, I might opt out of saying diversity, equity, inclusion. I might say authenticity or belonging. It's the same conversation. It's a different label. It's maddening to me that I have to do that, that equity is not a bad word, but there are people who do feel threatened by it. And part of the reason why they're threatened by it is they don't understand, why do I have to go to a Hispanic Heritage Month event? Why is this relevant to me? And I think for the people who put together these events, whether you're a corporation, a trade association, or a college, before you do any of these things, figure out why you're doing it. And if the answer is to make more money, that's actually okay. But make sure you understand that's why you're doing it. And then when you understand what you want to have happen as the result of these things, then you can retro engineer from there. If you're just doing this as a PR move, if you're just looking so you have something sexy for your Instagram, oh my gosh, look at the quadriplegic we had speak to us last month. Isn't that great? Yeah, you got your cookies and your flowers, and it's a PR move. And that's not sustainable. And that's the stuff that people burn out on. When there is,
Well, one of the things that you said a little bit earlier is that the most in demand topics, or at least the most tickets into the door, right, is show me how we're going to up our bottom line, right? Show me how we're going to make money and show us how we're going to save time. So how do you merge that with also this important world of topic, right? When it obviously healthy teams make healthy corporations, healthy staff makes healthier universities, all of those kinds of things. And at the core is communication. And that's how you're going to make more money and save time. But how do you bring all of that together?
I mean, I think it starts by understanding that we don't know as much as we should know. And there's certainly been plenty of negative things happening at our school systems in terms of how we teach American history. And a lot of what my thought leaders are doing is filling in gaps. I mean, there are contributions to our culture in the corporate workplace, technologically, that have origins in marginalized communities that most people don't have any idea. And I think when we learn about the civil forfeiture and the seizure of Black land, and a lot of these things have happened in the last century. When you look at the case for reparations, which some people immediately, get on their heels about and are deeply concerned about giving away money. But when you actually bring in somebody who's done the work and understands what reparations really means, it actually would be a boon to our economy. And there's plenty of work out there, but most people aren't willing to invest in that because it's not something that is easily digestible. What I'm suggesting, I'm not saying that this is easy. What I'm saying is audiences are ready for those challenges, because in order to stay relevant, whether it's retaining the best and the brightest employees, whether it's to retain your market share, you're going to have to understand different communities and how they interact with you. And you're also going to need to understand the intersectionality within those communities. A Black woman has a different lived experience in America than a Black trans woman. And if you don't have space for that nuance, you are going to have gaps in your products, your marketing, and your staffing. And that's one of the things that I find most infuriating is we live in a culture that doesn't understand nuance, doesn't want nuance. Social media doesn't like it. We want everything to be binary, A or B. You're a
Well,
boy or a
for,
girl.
yeah, for the average speaker, they just want to know how to get the gig, right? Whether they are a woman, a man, disabled, whoever they might be, mentally challenged, neurodivergent, all of these marginalized spaces. They just want to know, how do I get the gig, right? And I want to be a speaker. I want to be getting my voice out there. I want to make a career of this. So how do I kind of get into the door? And I think you really touched on something that I'm seeing a lot of demand for in our agency. I'd like to know if you are in yours, but you really hit it when you said that whole kind of gain and retain piece. How do I gain talent and retain talent? And something I'm seeing even more so than that is, prior to the crazy, thing that we all went through as a globe, where we're all locked down. And prior to that, talent was generally scouted out and brought in from the outside at the mid-management level and above into the C-suite. Now that talent pool has greatly reduced. So number one, we need to look outside of the box that we've always looked in before, number one, but also we need to look internally. Who do we have within our teams right now who could be that leadership potential person? So gain talent, retain talent, make workplace satisfaction, right? But also rising leaders from within. You could be a rock star in your department, but put you in a leadership position, handling all of the complexities of managing a team. Maybe maybe that's just not something you've done. How do we bring in an outside voice, an outside corporate trainer who can help do that? So I really believe these are inroads, right? These are steps into the door, and through that, very relevant top of mind items. The whole idea of, if you're going to have a healthy environment, you need to make sure everybody feels included, everybody feels equal, and everybody is treated in a fair and an equitable manner, right? Those messages come through the door of top of mind topics. And I get you, like, I get what you're saying, but it still is what it is. Like, we can fight the good fight, but at the same time, I need to feed my family and I need to get those speaking engagements. So how do I get them? Right. That just kind of speak to that. And then I want to let people know how we can get a hold of you.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we have to do is stop assuming. That's one of the problems that we face here is people assume that because someone comes from this community or speaks to this community or is a thought leader in a racial justice or a social justice movement, that they don't have management skills or leadership skills, or that people who have certain identities aren't going to be a good fit in those places. And I would say, one of the reasons why so many of the DEI initiatives have fallen apart and have kind of evaporated over the last couple of years is simply because they didn't have any gravitas or substance behind it. If you are, bringing in an AAPI speaker, and then you look at leadership and management, and you see no one with AAPI identities, it rings false. Like, it has to have something behind it. And I think one of the great things about bringing in an outside voice is they're going to open some doors by filling in some of those gaps that, again, our school systems have done a terrible job educating us on these things. And I think a lot of, when I was, sending speakers out to, some of these tech companies in 2020, they were shocked by some of the information that they were receiving, because there had never been anybody with that identity in the boardroom. The C-suite was just another bunch of cisgender straight white guys, and they were all talking to each other and reaffirming and confirmation bias. And then when they bring in an outside speaker, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't sound right to me. Well, yeah, there's a reason it doesn't sound right to you, because you've only been listening to other people who have your lived experience. And for me, that was why I wanted to do what I do, because if nothing else, it gets boring hearing stories about people who've kind of taken the same path as I have. I have a middle-class background from Manassas, Virginia, and my story sounds like a lot of people who look like me. But when I meet people who grew up in other countries, in other socioeconomic conditions, I can really learn something from them. If I'm continually in these echo chambers of people who have the same lived experience and the same beliefs and the same values, I'm going to make the same decisions.
Okay, so we're at the place where there are going to be people who really resonate with your message, and people who really resonate.
And they're going to be people who want to send me hate mail.
I don't think you're doing anything good unless you get a little hate, right? As the moment I start getting some pushback, I'm like, I think I'm on the right track, right?
Sure.
So it's all good. How do people find you? What's the best way that you like? I know that you and I both focus on emerging voices, right? Those who aren't already celebrity voices. I'm sure in your 120 speakers, you've got those, but those who maybe aren't an everyday household name quite yet. So how does somebody apply to collective speakers? What's the best way? How do you like them to reach out to you?
Well, I mean, that's another reason why I wanted to do what I do, because most agencies want everybody to come out of the womb with a tight 45-minute keynote and a $15,000 starting honorarium. And there really isn't, most agencies don't really want to invest in the development of new talent, especially people who don't fit the box or check the boxes of what a traditional speaker looks and sounds like. That's one of the things that I actually love to do. And if you go through my roster and you look at Blair Amani or Amani Barbarin or Sean Gold, who is a nonverbal speaker, or Ali Stroker, or any of the other people that I, have under the umbrella of collective speakers, a lot of them had didn't have a lot of deep experience in going out and doing speaking the way that we do it now. And of course, that's changed in the last few years. So I enjoy the process of finding out, okay, what's your story? How can we tell it in a way that's compelling? You don't have to have a PowerPoint or a Prezi. You don't have to necessarily have a tight 45. That has all changed. And for me, it's about finding out a compelling story and helping that artist find a way to make that accessible for an audience, even if the audience doesn't necessarily want to hear it. There's a difference between disagreeing and being offended. And I think too often we conflate the two. If somebody says something you disagree with, are you really offended, or are you just confused, or are you just unaware of the information they're providing you? And I think that's one of the reasons why speakers bureaus have failed in this area, is there is this deafening absolute obsession with, we can't offend anybody. If we put somebody too provocative out there, nobody will do business with us. I don't have that fear. I have people who are very provocative, and they may really upset you with some of the things they say. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, there's a place for discourse. I believe there is a place for learning through disagreement. When I first started doing this, we did debates on college campuses. It would be this person versus this person, and they would debate, and then there'd be a Q&A, and then everybody would go out for whiskey afterwards, and it was great. And that was the 90s and the early aughts. And now I never book debates. It's just too risky for people to put those kinds of conversations on stage. And I think that's a real shame. I think there needs to be space for people to have folks say things they are going to disagree with, and then have the opportunity to ask that person questions and to have that give and take. I think there's a lot to benefit from that, rather than sitting passively being sold the same story over and over again. But if you're interested in your journey and continuing and working with us, the easiest way is to go to collectivespeakers.com. You can email me. It's Sean@collectivespeakers.com, SEAN@collectivespeakers.com. I personally review every inquiry. Obviously, I can't sign everybody who reaches out. We would have 3,000 people on our roster right now. But I always enjoy taking time with people who are passionate about their story and finding a way to reach a bigger audience with that. That's a fun challenge. And even if I can't always be the messenger who does that, I'm always happy to give them some tips, some guidelines on how to get started and how to go from, $200 for the local Kiwanis Club to, getting onto some of these workshops and breakout sessions at some of the bigger panels.
Yes. Okay. So what is kind of your minimum to get for a newer speaker to get their foot in the door? What should they be doing in their own journey that is of value when they approach you? Let's say they've honed in their talk. Maybe they've gotten some speaker assets together. They have refined their story in a way that can connect with audiences. Like, what are some of those pieces that you look for where you say, okay, you might be somebody that we can really look at representing, versus someone that you need to say, okay, go do work in these areas and then come back to me when you've got this under your belt?
Yeah. I think most of the speakers that we decide to pass on early on haven't really honed a specific point of view. When I say, we represent mental health speakers, okay, you got to tell me something more than take a bubble bath for self-care. You tell me something unique that's not already out in the marketplace. And I think most people will struggle with, how do I define my unique voice? We have, as an agency, a very specific brand. And I think people assume that, okay, because I'm neurodiverse, or because I am Latinx, or whatever my identity is, that's sufficient. And sometimes I sit down with people and I'm like, okay, so let's talk about your speech topics. And they haven't taken the time to think about that. The other thing is, you really have to, it's a little bit like when a musician is getting ready to record an album. Sometimes they'll go out and do some small little club shows, and they're working through some new songs. And, the way they do it in Albuquerque, and then the next night in Santa Fe, they do it a little bit differently. And then by the time they go into the studio, it sounds very different than where it started. It's a little bit the same way with speaking. Is in the early days when you're just getting started, that's the time to say yes to everything. A high school, like a charity, whatever, emceeing a 5K, whatever it is, get out there and learn how to get your material and how to find out where it resonates and where it falls flat with an audience, and get video, video, video. That's always the thing that I always tell people. It's the most basic barter you can ask. If somebody wants you to come speak for free, say yes. Will you provide me with a video copy of my talk? Because
And a video testimonial,
video
if
testimonials
possible.
are great too. But I think for a speaker who's really trying to develop their craft, they need to be able to sit down and watch themselves. And that's a hard process. I've done that with some people and I'm like, you see why that joke didn't land? And there isn't any, I don't really have a checklist. I mean, I've brought people in that were much further behind than other folks were in terms of their development. For me, it's really about, do you have a message that is in need right now? And are you the right messenger for it? I have a lot of people who want to give diversity speakers, who want to give diversity talks, who look like me. And I'm sorry, that's not it. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't
There's,
people that we
yeah.
represent who do have my identity, but I want to make sure that, are you the person to give this talk? I would never accept a speaking engagement on diversity. That's not my lane. That's not my lived experience. I'm not an expert on that. And I would say sometimes there's some people who are a little bit out of their lanes that think they can do something. And when I drill down with a couple of questions, it's clear that they're not. So you really have to make sure that rather than having 17 different offerings, have three, and have three really good ones, and make sure they're three that don't already exist on 900 others pages right now.
Yeah, really some really good points there. One of the things is finding your unique voice. And as I pop out and pop back in, I'd really like for you to talk about that. What is a unique point of view, a unique voice that would be yes. There we go.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got the last part of that question.
Okay. So somebody comes in with their story, and obviously it's a
Mm-hmm.
moving, real story. How do they take that story and make it relevant to the audience? So it's just not one kind of bleeding heart story, but that it
Right.
actually moves the dial in the room.
Well, I think the best thing I can do there is give an example, and a lot of where we're finding some development is in neurodiversity, and a lot of that has to do with neurodiversity in the workplace. What are the accommodations that a neurodiverse person needs in order to perform at the company? Might be as simple as giving them more flexibility on remote work. Maybe they need different tech in order to do their job, but when we tell these stories and you realize that maybe we said no to that applicant because they demonstrated symptoms of autism, or because they didn't speak the way that other people speak, we're missing out on some really kick-ass talent. And one of the things I try to help people do, especially when we go into corporate spaces, whether it's ERGs or trade associations or anything like that, is where can we increase our value? As you said, the pool is shrinking. There's people that are left on the sidelines because they're not given a chance, because they see the autism diagnosis, they see their identity, they see they have a speech impediment of some sort, and they immediately go, well, we couldn't possibly put them on the showroom floor. I'll tell you, a company who does a great job of that is Disney. I went to Disneyland with my daughter last year, and I was completely heartened by the fact that there were so many different forms of diversity right there at the front gate, people who were scanning our magic bands for us to come in. And you don't see that in a lot of other places. And I think that's by no means going to solve the problem, but it's a really good start, because it shows you're actually trying to do something, and you understand that just because people have some form of limitation, or what we perceive as a limitation, they might actually have a superpower you can access if you take the time to get to know them.
Mm, okay. So I, I, I love what you said about basically collecting data, like taking those low pay, no pay engagements, because and learn your audience, learn your own point of view, see where people are leaning in, and see where you're just kind of losing them. I'm so with you on that. Like, just start getting your voice out there and accept anything, right? I think that that's true for even more established speakers, because you can tend to get disconnected and forget what's top of mind for the average person, right? For the average you and I who are out there. So just start speaking. I love your tip on make sure you get a recording. And if they're not recording, ask if you can bring somebody who can record, right? That's so, so important. And get feedback. If you can get feedback, I think that not just from the organizers, but also from the audience. What were some key takeaways? What really resonated with you? What would you have liked to have heard more of? Right, you're really starting to understand your audience as it relates to your message, and how you can make that bridge, how you can make it really land and connect. So as we close, Sean, you know that this is Speak Pact, and this is our pact together to make a greater impact with the power of our voices. How can that emerging voice who might not feel mainstream, what is something tactical that they can begin putting into action tomorrow that might move the dial and help them if they approach a seasoned agent like yourself, might be given the time of day?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is don't be afraid of hard conversations. I feel sometimes when people reach out to me, they're, trying to soften the edges. They're trying to, put on a little bit more of an elegance that isn't necessary. I think, there is a space now for really raw, hard conversations. That doesn't mean that you go in and, completely lambast the organizers who've invited you. But what I'm saying is, it's okay if there's some squirm moments in your talk. So much of the motivational and inspirational circuit for years was we're all chasing that standing ovation at the end, and we want to have the applause lines and the laugh lines, and we never want to make anyone uncomfortable. Make people uncomfortable. Don't let that fear of people being uncomfortable, if that is part of your truth. I don't suggest seeking out discomfort, but if parts of your story are hard to hear, that's okay. And if you're wondering, okay, well, what do I do with that once I've started that journey? How do I continue that? How do I improve? The great thing about the events is most cases you get a roadmap for improvement, and that is the Q&A. You finish your remarks, you finish the panel discussion, the fireside chat, whatever you've done, and then there's time for 10, 15 minutes of audience and Q&A, and the audience is going to ask you questions. When you leave that stage, make sure you write down those questions. Make note, what questions did the audience ask you? And then as you go out, start to make connections. Hey, I'm getting this question more and more. Maybe that should be in your talk. The audience Q&A will always give you instructions on how to do better, because that's something that you didn't clarify well enough, or it's something you didn't cover that they wanted to hear from you. So use that audience Q&A as an opportunity to do better, because the audience will tell you exactly what the next talk should include.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. And I so echo what you were saying. Ask them, right? Ask the audience. Listen to their questions. See what you're still leaving them wanting, and what they still feel a need for, so that you can meet that need in your upcoming conversations, your upcoming talks, maybe your next level thing that you offer them, whatever it might be. There's always going to be questions. And I think the questions change. They're not going to stay the same. The questions that you field today are not going to be the questions that you're going to be fielding 3 months, 3 years from now, right? Because our moods change. Things are changing in our respective societies. So you've brought up some really important topics, Sean. So it's Sean Lawton, founder of Collective Speakers. Reach out to him. And I just want to say thank you for bringing your insights to us today and sharing. I didn't ask you how many, 2017, you had already been in 20. So now you're 3 decades worth of knowledge to us, right?
Didn't have to. I mean, I suppose when we're talking about knowledge and wisdom, 3 decades doesn't sound as bad. The crow's feet here say something else, but yeah, I would say, what you see here and what you're hearing from me, and what I hope people take away from this is curiosity is a good thing, and I wish people would tap into their curiosity more. We so many times don't ask the questions that we really should be asking because we're afraid. if you can harness your curiosity, you're going to do great as a speaker.
Ah, fabulous. Okay, thank you for being with us today, Sean. We so appreciate your presence here.
Loved being here. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Speak Pact podcast. To become a recommended speaker of Antoniette's WPC speaker agency, or you are a host or planner looking for a dynamic expert in optimized performance, Antoniette would like to personally meet with you. Secure a time with her at speakerbooker.com. Again, that is speakerbooker.com. It all begins with a vision, a voice, and a pact to impact. Join the Speak Pact movement by joining our new private Facebook group at the link in our show notes. Find us on nearly every social media platform at One Antoniette. That's number 1, ANTONIETTE, or simply hashtag SpeakPact.